You're listening to the Men's Dating Mastery Podcast with host Alec Chase, bringing you the experts in dating, sex, and relationships.
Hey guys, welcome back to the MDM Podcast. I know it's been a while since the last episode, so I'd like to thank you for sticking with it and tuning in again. I really appreciate you being with me. Today's episode is one that I've actually been meaning to record for a while now, actually since the beginning, since I decided to start this podcast. My guest today is Stephen Nash, and for those of you who have taken any interest in the pickup scene, chances are you've heard of Stephen before. He originally appeared in the book The Game, where he went under his pen name Playboy. He was one of the original guys who lived in the Project Hollywood house with a whole bunch of other pickup artists who worked on their skills with women full-time and lived all sorts of adventures. My conversation with Steve is all about his journey, what pushed him into the pickup community, what he experienced and learned while in it, what ultimately pushed him out of it, and how he continued to develop his skills with women and evolve as a man after leaving the community. Now, what I personally like about this conversation is that Stephen provides a pretty balanced depiction of his experience as a pickup artist. He speaks about how it benefited him, but also other ways in which it held him back. So there are plenty of lessons to be derived from this conversation if you listen attentively. Now, before we get into it, I do want to give a quick shout out to a friend who developed an app called Pickup Buddy Dating Wingman. The name speaks for itself, but to elaborate, the app does function quite literally like a wingman in your pocket. It's got features like opening lines that are generated based on the situation, date ideas, texting tips, affirmations for when you get stuck in your head, and a few other features. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, then this endorsement may come as somewhat a surprise to you because the predominant and recurring message on this show is honest, natural, authentic communication with women. And in fact, you'll continue to hear that message in today's episode. So to be clear, this app does not contradict any of that. Where I find this app useful is for those moments, and it happens to all of us, when you're stuck in your head, you find yourself at a loss of words, and you just don't know what to say. So this app can help you put a few words in your mouth for those moments when you're feeling a little stifled, just to get you to go over there and say hello rather than let an opportunity pass you by. If you'd like to check it out, there's a paid version and a free version as well. It's available on iPhone as well as Android. The free version's got a bunch of features, so you can check that out first, and if you want more, you can always shell out a few pennies for the premium one. Now, just for the record, I'm not getting compensated for this in any shape or form. I just wanted to help a brother out, and he's put a lot of effort into this. And depending on where you're at in your dating life, I think this might actually be another tool in your arsenal that will help move you forward towards your goals. Anyhow, that's all the marketing that I've had for this episode, so let's move on with the show. Hey, Stephen, welcome.
Thanks, Alec. Pleasure to be with you.
For those people out there who might not be familiar with you, can you just provide a brief introduction to who you are, where you're from, what you do?
Yeah, of course. Well, where I'm from, that's actually interesting. Right now I'm in Southern California. My wife and I just moved out here, but I'm originally from North Carolina and kind of, I guess, came of age, so to speak, in New York City for the last 20 or so years. That's where I kind of started my business and began doing pickup, and then kind of morphed into a dating coach there, and have had a thriving, fun time in that great city. But I, like many men, I sort of had an awakening or a kind of an awareness about 12 years ago, where I come out of a breakup. I had a relationship end rather suddenly and surprisingly, and I was struck by the fact that that whole relationship, and it was a 6-month deal. The woman did everything. She started it, she maintained it, and then she ended it. And I was just this kind of passenger along this ride with her. And so I got curious about my own dating life and my own ability to attract women. And I began to investigate things and eventually found my way into the pickup community, got very good at that, and moved into Project Hollywood, which Neil then kind of takes over that story in the book The Game. Although I have certain, my own take on it and my own vignettes, so to speak. And then I gave all that up, moved back to New York because it didn't really work for me, and learned from some natural friends of mine there, and came up with my own system, my own style, my own way about improving my own dating life, and found it to be very, very rewarding and rich and very enriching of my life, and have found my way into a wonderful long-term relationship. I'm married now, and we picked up from New York about 3 weeks ago, and now we're settling into Southern California, and it's going well. It's exciting.
Fantastic. You've said a lot of interesting facts there that I would like to unwrap one by one. And
Sure.
So let's go to the beginning. Let's go to you getting into the pickup community in the first place. So it sounds like the catalyst for that was a nasty breakup. Am I right?
Yeah, it wasn't nasty per se, but it was surprising. It just was out of nowhere. Like, I thought, God, things are going well. I was struck by how little I knew about what was actually going on. And so I remember very clearly one day I was working a job in Midtown Manhattan, and I went to my computer, and I was in my little cubicle, and I went to Google and I typed the word seduction in, because I couldn't remember the writer of the book Art of Seduction, whom I now know to be, of course, Robert Greene, and I was interested in learning more about him. And so I went to Google and I typed in seduction, and the search results, as you can well imagine, filled the page with all kinds of things that immediately got my attention. And so that was I dove into a few websites there, and I found my way into Ross Jeffries. I found my way into David D'Angelo, and really, maybe most importantly, at least in my case, was the pickup scene. And I started researching, various forums, and at the time, fastseduction.com was the popular place for information. And so I began to kind of extract things from posts, and I bought a few products, and began to try to employ some of these techniques. I had done a lot of acting over the years, so learning scripts or routines and adopting them to become my own, making them mine, was not too foreign for me. So I was able to take, say, a Ross Jeffries, what did he call them? Patterns. These were NLP language patterns. I remember there was one called the Discovery Channel pattern. There's one called like a roller coaster pattern. I can't remember the names of them, but they were very evocative. And to be totally frank, they were kind of weird. And I think for many guys, they tried these things out and they didn't work. I was able to adapt them in some ways and make some of these things work. It took a lot of practice. Anyway, I eventually took a workshop and was invited to move into Project Hollywood, and I had some success on my own. When I took that workshop and saw some real pickup artists do their thing, I was immediately like, the ability to see somebody do it and model their behavior and adopt it to be my own was extremely helpful.
Yeah, so Steve, I just want to take a pause here, and I want to tell the listeners a little bit about what Project Hollywood is, because naturally anybody who read the book The Game would know, but a lot of the people who listen to this podcast aren't particularly drawn to pickup, and so they might not have. So Project Hollywood was this house in LA. It was in Hollywood, right?
It was in the Hollywood Hills. Yeah.
So,
Dean Martin's old mansion.
So it was yourself. It was a whole bunch of other pickup artists who are now very prominent, and many of whom have businesses of their own. You guys were all living together and basically working on your skills with women full time.
Yeah, it was a 24/7 deal, and the origin of it wasn't that it was to become some kind of pickup artist mecca, but rather that it was to be a real cooperative amongst myself and the others, where we each brought a certain skill, and that we wouldn't need to resort to pickup, but rather we were going to build a certain lifestyle together in that house that would naturally avail us of beautiful women rather than us having to go out and kind of do target practice, which is basically what pickup is. So the whole thing was, it sort of blew up because there were two competing businesses in there. And that eventually was the jury on that experiment. It eventually ended due to the undue pressure of two competing businesses. But boy, we had some fun and could tell some stories along the way, that's for sure.
Well, why don't we go there? Why don't share some stories? I mean, you worked on your skills with women more so than the average male would, and so you've definitely achieved some success. Like, what kind of heights did you reach? What was your lifestyle like once you were starting to get that success?
Well, it's funny. It really spiked early. I think leaving New York, coming into a new environment where there were no anchors at all. I mean, I had no experiences in LA really. Whereas in New York, I had 10 years of some struggle with women and dating. So I kind of felt free out there. And I found myself really released by that. And early on, I had tremendous success. I mean, I landed, Neil picked me up at the airport, and we started going out and, every night. And I remember there were 4 nights in a row where my friend Cameron and I, who's in the book, I can't remember his handle in the book, but anyway, we were close friends, and we went out 4 nights in a row and pulled girls back to the house all 4 nights. And within 6 months, I think I hooked up with it's a lot of women. I mean, it was a lot of activity, a lot of action, and much of it, interestingly enough, unsustainable, because the predicate, the ground upon which these interactions were based, and then they weren't relationships, they were more kind of just sexual tension encounters that evolved, that resulted usually in sex, and then nothing after that. It became this kind of Groundhog Day existence where you'd wake up, you'd kiss the girl goodbye, and then you'd start all over again, and you'd do it again the next day. And really, after a couple of months, it became so robotic, so mechanical, so we had maxed out our ability to be productive with these pre-scripted routines and gimmicks, and there were so many other things now that were beginning to come to the fore. Other issues that men who struggle with women in dating can't really mask for any period of time. We had parties in that house. We had insane encounters. Courtney Love lived with us for a while, which was ridiculous. She had gotten in some trouble with the law. She was hardcore on drugs at the time. She used to wake me up in the middle of the night, insisting. She was convinced that I had pornography. She was like, "I know you've got porn. You're a 30-year-old guy. I know you've got porn. Where's your porn?" I said, "I don't have porn. I'm not into porn." She just couldn't believe it. But she would wake you up at 4 a.m. wanting to watch porn.
That's hilarious.
It's ridiculous.
But tell me, you said at one point it became very mechanical. And so my understanding is everything you were doing was scripted. It was routine based. You weren't expressing yourself necessarily authentically or naturally. You just had these scripts that you knew worked until you executed them, right?
Right. And it became so robotic that we knew what script would follow the previous. We had what we called a routine stack, where we could more or less control the first 6 to 8 minutes of any interaction. Now, that might seem like such a great idea on the surface, but in reality, the real world control is an illusion, as I've come to learn. And eventually, being so robotic, so mechanical, so safe, I think that's a big word, so safe, so hidden behind these words and these scripts, women eventually began to look at us and think, this guy's funny, he's handsome, whatever, but I don't know who's there, and I don't trust him. And so trust became something that we were mystified by, and we couldn't codify it. We couldn't write it down. We couldn't script it. And eventually our success, hit the floor because women were so unconvinced that there was any authenticity to us. And to be totally honest, they were right. And so we would go out at night, and boy, I could dazzle you for 10 to 15 minutes. I could get phone numbers galore. And we would take guys out. We would show them the ropes. I would be talking to a cute girl or a couple of cute girls, and there would be 5 or 6 guys around me, unbeknownst to these women, listening in, taking notes, and watching me in action. And it was good. It was like a performance. But like a performance, it wasn't real. What was happening wasn't actually real. And so my success and the success of my colleagues really flatlined. We were getting nowhere, and we would call all these phone numbers the next day, and the women would never respond because, quite honestly, they didn't trust us. And to be totally frank, they were right not to trust us. So eventually, this led me to kind of quote unquote bottom out on all this. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. This isn't working for me. You know, I was a little older than many of those guys, like Tyler Durden, Papa. Those guys from Real Social Dynamics were a good 8 to 10 years younger than me. And I think that they were a little more tolerant of trying to figure this out. I was a more mature guy in my early 30s, and I just didn't feel like doing that anymore. I thought, this isn't right. This isn't working for me. And so I unplugged and came back to New York. I left all that stuff behind out there. Literally within 20 days or something, I packed my stuff up and moved back across country. And I just moved cross country from New York out here to California. That's not easy to do.
Stephen, can I just rewind a little bit?
Sure.
I'm just trying to reconcile in my mind, because on the one hand, it sounds like you had a lot of success. I mean, you definitely weren't starving for sex, that's for sure.
Right.
And yet at the same time, you're talking like there's this limitation on how successful you can be because there was a lack of authenticity. And so you'd call women whose numbers you got and they wouldn't reply because they didn't feel like there was authenticity. And so I'm just trying to reconcile between the two. Like, did things at one point just start to fall apart because you became numb to what you were doing? Or is it that you could get a one night stand, but you couldn't get more than that?
Both. It was either one or the other. And as strange as it may sound to some men, you know, I don't know a lot of people may be listening to this and at varying different levels of sexual history, but after a while, it's just like, God, you don't want to have to do you don't want to have to start over every morning. You don't want to have to kick it in. You want something to sustain. And, you know, I had emotional investments in some of these women. I remember one woman, I met her at a club in West Hollywood, and we hit it off, and I think a couple of nights later, I went over to her apartment and we ended up hooking up and having sex, and it all happened so quickly. And she told me later, actually, she said, you know, it was so polished. It was so smooth. It was too smooth. It was as if she said to me, it was like I became another person when I was with you, and I didn't like that. And so the trust factor was just never there, because the real person, me, and I think many of us, was hidden away behind the facade of all these clothes and scripts and routines. So that was one. And then the other scenario was that we would get to be so slick and so smooth and so polished, and we could get a phone number. Like, it became almost an automatic to get a phone number. But the more automatic the phone number was, the less likely we were to ever connect with her using that phone number. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many, and what we would eventually start to do is begin to think of ways to script and routine and control getting girls to call us back. We had all these ridiculous routines we used on the phones, text messaging scripts, and it was kind of crazy. So both of those scenarios are right, and it was often one or the other. And so these two extremes left me feeling very vacant, and that was what led me to become disenchanted with all of this. You know,
it's something that fascinates me, being too smooth and not actually working against you. I find that fascinating because when you're too smooth, too polished, there's just this, they feel like they can't trust you. And I'm just absolutely fascinated by that, because I think your average guy has this notion that the smoother you are, the more successful you're going to be. And I find there's almost a certain element of diminishing returns.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've learned over the years is that women crave connection. That's really a central part of what they're looking for in a man. They want to feel connected, and being too smooth, or actually being too smooth, is maybe the outer appearance of hiding, of really of not being vulnerable, of not
Absolutely.
allowing my real self to come forward. And so it's vulnerability. It's that authentic kind of display of myself. That is what leads to the connection. And that is what keeps a woman really engaged and interested.
So tell me, I kind of cut you off and took you back, but you were saying it sounds like the life you were living started to become a little hollow. And so you packed your bags, you went back to New York.
Yeah. And I fell back into my old routines, with my friends, my old community, my network, and things started to kind of come back to me. But I realized that, like, okay, somewhere between what I was doing before I went to LA and what I was doing in LA, somewhere in between there is a real a real teaching, there is a real path, and as I began to identify in my universe, so to speak, certain guys that I knew had success with women, but they weren't into pickup at all. They just had natural success. I began to really talk to them and unpack what it was that made them successful. And I began to put together, my own, I began to look for my own relationship to this. And so from the pickup world, I kind of pulled in social skills. I thought, social skills are useful. Learning how to talk to a woman, learning how to begin a conversation, learning how to flirt, learning how to tease, how to tell a story, how to hold her attention, how to consciously connect with her when I want to, how to reveal myself, how to escalate, how to make a move, all those things were useful, maybe devoid of any kind of prescripted routine, but underneath a lot of those things that I was doing in LA, I was able to extract a skill, an actual social skill. So a lot of our routines, for example, were really just ways of flirting. So what is flirting? So I began to unpack that and learn that and turn that into a skill which could be used in any and all situations. Meeting a woman, how do you start a conversation? Well, maybe I don't need some kind of complicated 3-step opinion opener structure. Maybe there's something simpler, a little more in the moment, a little more authentic. I was doing a lot of that at the time, trying to kind of unravel and find the nugget at the center of these routines that was what was effective. And so I began to first of all, I made a decision, no more routines. I'm doing everything natural, forget about any of that. And that helped too, by just not giving myself the opportunity to use them. But at the same time, I started looking at these naturals and talking to my friends who were really good with women, who are in relationships, and trying to understand what is the real dynamic that exists between men and women that evolves into a healthy relationship. And is there a way to stimulate that? Is there a way to model that? Is there a way for me to live or work on myself and engage with women in a way that allows for that to happen more naturally and more easily than what I was doing before I went to California, which was frankly nothing, and versus trying to completely control it like we were doing as pickup artists. So where I found myself eventually about a year later in between, I had these natural skills I was really good at, and I had formed this kind of natural approach to living that embodied certain principles that caused me to be more naturally attractive to the kinds of women that I was interested in.
So can you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. A lot of what I learned they weren't things that I came up with myself necessarily. What I did was I learned from a lot of different places and put them together into this, let's call it system, although that's not the right word, but that's the first word that comes to mind now. But, a lot of things I gleaned from David Data. I read a lot of spiritual books at the time, the Mahabharata, the Tao Te Ching, etc. And a few things that really came to the fore for me were, number one, that unless I, as a man, find some kind of aim or mission, let's call it, that can consume me, that I can give my life to, that I'm passionate about, that I love being involved in. It doesn't have to become like my career specifically or anything like that. I mean, it can. Let's hope. That's nice. But as long as I have a relationship to that and I'm invested in that, something happens to me. Something occurs inside of my body and inside of my psychology. One thing I found most men doing that I myself was doing at the time was my neediness of women, my desire or need for their approval, what we used to call validation, it was my number one priority in life. I wanted women to approve of me. I needed a woman by my side so that any social situation I could feel complete. I needed a woman to endorse me as a man so that I could feel like a man. I needed a woman, an attractive woman by me so that I could feel attractive. I was seeking security from them, whereas in truth, women crave security from a man. And so I had everything backwards. And so pickup became, in a way to kind of make this masquerade look and sound great, whereas in reality, that dynamic was still in place. So I had to reverse that. That was number one. And I pulled from David Data's tremendously important book, Way of the Superior Man, that it's a man's priority in life, and this is how men are hardwired, is to uncover this purpose or mission that I can give my life to. And I found that as I did that more and more and more, my need for a woman, my need for their attention, their affection, their approval reduced. And what was interesting to me was that I found that the kinds of women I naturally attracted were more right for me, were healthier for me. I was more attracted to them. So this was a big thing. Find something bigger than women that I can give my life to, that will rise to the number one position in my life, so that when a woman comes along, her importance will be more in the right size. My interest in women was outsized before that. So how do I right size it? Well, that was the solution. Find something that I can give myself to, and frankly, as a man, be passionate about and be willing to go to any lengths to accomplish or achieve or experience. So that was number one. And that was really based on understanding. And a friend of mine said it to me one night. We were driving out to Queens to the U.S. Open. And I said, Rob, his name was Robert, Rob, what is it that women want from men? And he looked at me and he said, that's easy, Stephen. It's security. And I was blown away by that. I thought, my God, I would have never come up with that on my own.
Well, define security, because in my opinion, there are a lot of different ways to interpret what that word means, right? And so how would you describe that?
Well, I think there are a lot of different ways to interpret it, and maybe it's important to keep it a little general, but I think initially I didn't quite understand what he meant, but I began to research it and uncover it, and I could see it play out in these different areas. Like if a man was physically secure, like particularly strong guys, for example, like men who really focus on the body and make their body this like powerful vehicle, women tend to respond to that. Rather, certain types of women tend to respond to that. Men who are particularly financially secure, very wealthy men, have a certain amount of attraction for women. As a society, we tend to, shun that, call it shallow, call it gold diggers or whatever. And maybe that's true, but underneath, there is something real happening there. There is a sense of security provided by having access to so much wealth. Donald Trump, a great example. He's very wealthy, and he has a very attractive woman in his life. Now, who knows about their relationship? That's not important, but nevertheless, that is a real magnet for women, financial security. The other one I've noticed a lot is what I would call social security, where celebrities will tend to orbit each other and find themselves in relationships purely with other celebrities. And I think there's a certain amount of social status that can be maintained by virtue of being with another person in that kind of A-list world. So there's a kind of social security there too. What I found over the years is that what I'm trying to do for myself through spiritual work, through lifestyle kind of design, through searching for what I would call freedom through the types of choices and the things that I do, is I'm looking for a type of emotional security. I want to be able to be okay and comfortable in my skin and really representing myself in an authentic way as much as I possibly can. And what I found is that has magnetized and attracted to me a woman who is absolutely perfect for me. And you'd have to ask her what is attractive about me to her, But my interpretation of it is, and because I've worked on this for so long, is that I have made my mission, my purpose is to find and build as much freedom as I possibly can into my life. And that is both externally and internally. And what that's done is caused me to be quite aligned with myself. I feel like I'm pretty connected to myself on a regular basis. And that has attracted a beautiful, healthy, spiritual, very wise woman into my world. So I would keep it at that. You know, I think each person's definition of that might be different, but search for it, find it, invest in it, and something special can happen.
Well, you know what? I'd like to explore something else. You just spoke about something that I find not only very interesting, but something that I very much share with you. And perhaps by virtue of being a man, we tend to value freedom very highly. And it's something that we seek, something that, you know, through my own personal soul searching, I've identified that as my top priority. But I feel like you and I are far from the exception.
Yeah.
A lot of men say that. And so I think about this concept quite a bit, particularly when it comes to freedom in the context of being with a woman, because a lot of men will, you know, they'll try to avoid settling down, so to speak, getting into an exclusive relationship for fear of losing their freedom. And you've actually done that. You're a married man. And so how were you able to find freedom in the context of the relationship that you have?
Well, I'll tell you, for many, I sort of view freedom in these two ways. One is very horizontally and one is very vertically. And let me explain. And I hope this isn't too heady, but I think it's the best answer to your question. I think for many years I was searching for freedom horizontally, meaning I want a lot of women. You know, on the plane of the earth, I want to have experiences with as many women as I want. I want to make as much money as I want. I want to travel to as many places as I want. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. And I did that. And it was incredibly exciting and rewarding, and it taught me so much. And I eventually came to a place where, at least in the category of women, I realized that in order for me to become more free internally of various parts of myself that were holding me back, various, let's call them inhibitions of intimacy. That just came to me. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but certain barriers or resistance to really getting close to people, and in particularly one person. And so my interest in freedom kind of shifted from the horizontal to the vertical. I wanted to go deep with one person because I knew instinctively that by deepening my relationship to one person, and by virtue of that to myself, you know, my relationship with my wife is absolutely a reflection of my relationship with myself. By going deeper and deeper and deeper, I was really freeing myself of various fears, psychological hang-ups that I maybe gathered as a kid, all kinds of things. And it's an ongoing practice. You know, I'll tell you, this morning I woke up and I kind of came out of a daze. My wife was awake before me, which is very uncommon. And I found myself immediately kind of clench up, like I just want to be alone. I don't want to connect with her right now. And then I saw that happen, and I realized I don't want that. That's not what I want at all. I mean, she's stroking my hair, she's scratching my shoulder, she's giving me so much attention and love. And I could see, like in this mind's eye that we have, I could see that I was resisting because I was afraid, because I was, for some reason, a little vulnerable first, moment of waking up in the morning. And so I relaxed that, and I allowed that to let go. I turned my body to her. And we had this wonderful kind of beginning of the day. The sun's coming into this beautiful little house here, etc. So it was kind of this, it's a perfect little microcosm for what I'm talking about. The extreme of the first is like, I'm just going to pretend to be somebody else all day long. And I took to pick up, that was my version of that. Whereas what I'm really looking for, and I think this is our heart's desire in some real way. And as a man, my attention shifted from this horizontal freedom to vertical freedom. I wanted to be deeply myself, and I knew instinctively that to find that, I needed to be deeply connected to another human being, and in this case, my wife.
That's, I almost envisioned a matrix as you were speaking about your horizontal freedom and your vertical freedom, because I think you called what was it? Inhibitions of emotions?
Of intimacy.
Inhibitions of intimacy. So kind of resonated with that. So as you're seeking freedom horizontally, financial freedom, multiple women in your life, etc., you're closing yourself off from an emotional connection.
Right. I'm able to kind of bounce off of people and give the appearance of everything's fine. But in fact, for me, and I think every individual needs to explore this themselves. I mean, there could be inflection points through there differently for other men listening to this. I don't know. I think I'm particularly skilled at helping men at this, kind of making that transition into really wanting to have a relationship and get a girlfriend. That's something I'm particularly good at, simply because that was my journey, was so much about that. But yeah, for me, and if you look at like the esoteric tradition of the cross, Christianity, some feel originally was, having a relationship to something higher than myself, in that case, God, but also being on the planet, in the world, of the world, being able to mix it up in business, in relationships, have fun, travel, taste all parts of this earth, but maintain a relationship with something higher than myself, some kind of maybe power that is universal, some kind of energy, some sort of spiritual connection that gives me the freedom to be myself in any and all of those circumstances. And for me, like as a man, that feels like my work. Cellularly, when I say that, I kind of light up. Like, that's what I want. I want to be in this world. I want to taste all of it. But I also don't want to do so in a way where I'm detached from it, where I'm somehow not connected to it. I want to be in it but not of it. I want to still be me, but I want to be able to enjoy all parts of it.
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
I really like the terminology you use in seeking horizontal freedom. If you don't go about it the right way, you can actually deprive yourself of total freedom.
Right. You have to have both. Like, I could sit here and meditate all day and be unaffected by the world and not leave the house. Well, that's not really effective either. For me, like, I want to be out in the world. I want to be experiencing things. So how to do that, but in a way that I'm connected to myself and not absorbed and necessarily controlled by those things either. I want to still maintain the spine of me and be in the mix.
Well, let me ask you this question. In seeking freedom, you decided to, I guess I made an assumption, but I assume you're in a monogamous relationship. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And so does the desire to be with other women crop up?
There is that. I've done that before, and I just happen to know for myself, having experienced that, and it's actually a kind of a hot topic right now because of Neil's new book, The Truth, where he kind of explores this in a very dramatic way, which is sort of the follow-up to The Game, I guess. It's no mystery to me that he and I have had such a similar path. But, I think for me, like, intimacy, being able to really truly be with one other person, for me is the highest form of like a spiritual connection that I can find. I feel that instinctively, and I know that when I feel attraction towards another woman, and by the way, if you're in a relationship or you're married like I am listening to this, and you feel somehow that it's inauthentic or weird, or you're ashamed, or you're freaked out by the fact that maybe you notice other beautiful women in the world, don't be. It's normal. In fact, biologically, some might argue that men are designed to kind of spread their seed far and wide. There may be some truth in that. I think, though, that spiritually, for me, what I'm drawn to, what I'm interested in, and what I'm invested in is a connection with one other person where this intimacy can be unclogged for myself. And we've come so far. I mean, listen, for her to become involved with a guy who used to be, a great pickup artist and was in this book and everything, it's like she sort of, she realized that there were some things in me that needed to be kind of reorganized, let's say. But I feel like for me, in that primal kind of vertical axis way, intimacy and being with one person is where it's at. And I'll also add that when there have been times where I'm, say, particularly attracted to somebody for whatever reason, their outward beauty or some sort of radiance they have. I think that's a big thing for men, and particularly for me. Radiance is such an attraction. There's such an allure in that. What I've seen for myself is I'm actually trying to run away from something that I'm unwilling to see in those moments. And so I always come back to myself. I'll also add, Paul Janko.
Hold on a second.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to, before I lose what you just said, what do you mean by that, trying to run away from something?
Well, I think, and this could be something very specific to me. Other men might relate to it, but, the intimacy and really being vulnerable and myself with one other person could be like the Mount Everest of my life or of any man's life, of really being completely open and whole with another person. It might be something that is so frightening for many of us that in some moments where that is triggered, where that is maybe about to be witnessed by myself in a deeper way, that I might run from that and check out the 25-year-old girl, working on her computer at Starbucks or something, where I might bounce off of something very painful inside of me. And instead of seeing that, instead of wanting to really be with that, which can be uncomfortable, I might just look for some kind of shallow fix to kind of distract me from it. Does that help?
Yeah, it does, and I resonated with it. I find it's almost instinctual that if you're with somebody and if things aren't rosy, it's almost instinctual to go and find comfort in the outward beauty of another woman. And if you do that, and I have done that, I find you feel worse after the fact.
Yes.
Because you did it for the wrong reasons. You didn't do it out of genuine desire. You did it as a form of escape from whatever discomfort you might have been feeling in the moment.
Exactly right. I had the exact same experience, and there was such a tremendous remorse afterwards. And so now you and I, we know that we know this. And so what's wonderful about it is that when I see myself doing that, when I see myself suddenly kind of looking outside of myself for some validation, which is the same thing we were talking about a few minutes ago, I now know that's a cue. That's a smoke signal. Like, okay, no, I've got to reverse my gaze here. Something's happening inside of me that I'm not willing to look at. So why not be a little willing to look at that right now? And I'm telling you that the fruits of that kind of inquiry are vastly superior to getting a smile from some girl or wherever that may lead. Yeah, it's big stuff, man. It's not easy. But it's very important. And I think it's so useful to have this kind of exchange so that other people listening to this, even if they're not at that point, maybe they're single and they're just looking for, man, to teach me how to meet more women. I get it. I understand. But down the road, these kinds of things are where we eventually find ourselves. And I think that it's important to show men that this is actually what it's about.
Well, and isn't that the funny thing? Because the majority of our conversation is really revolving around being rather than doing. And these aren't my words. Tyler has used them a lot. And I think any man that's spent a long enough time consciously working on his skills with women, he realizes in the end that you almost need to move away from seeking women in order to bring more women into your life. That's the funny part about it, but it's not something you can say to a guy that hasn't been laid in a year and not getting attention from a woman. It's just not going to register. And I wouldn't even say that the guy is unevolved or lacks the intellect to understand that. It's just, I guess when that desperation is there, it's tough to see past it.
Yeah, it can become very consuming. And for me, looking back, when I was at that place, I needed to deal with that. That's what I had to do. One thing I've learned over the years is that what I want, there's a certain honor I need to give to what I want. So if I'm a guy like you described who hasn't been laid in a year, hadn't had a relationship in a while, or is not having the kind of dating life I want, that's where I need to focus. I need to do that. I need to deal with that. And what a great time to have to be in that place where there's so many resources and so much information. Maybe there's a gluttony of it where I can figure that out. 20 years ago, that was less possible. Now we have the internet, we have people, businesses, we have all this stuff going on. We have this podcast. We have resources where people can get this kind of content and apply it and get results. So if that's the guy, honor that, be in that place, go for it, and do what I did. That's what I tell people. Do what I did. Throw yourself into it. Absolutely, go for it. Go for it. If that's where you're at, do it 100%. Don't do it 50%. Halfway doesn't get you anywhere. My view is all the way in. And then when it doesn't work, you retool and you re-engineer and you go in a different direction.
Yeah. I'm wondering, when you were in the pickup scene, how long did you stay in it? I mean, this routine-based lifestyle that consisted of sequential one-night stands with random women, how long were you in that space?
It was about 9 months to a year, somewhere in there.
So that's not very long.
Not very long, but I was in my early 30s at the time. And as I said, I had some ability, being an actor. I had the ability to take scripts and routines and apply them very easily. I don't think many other men kind of had that skill set, which is a kind of a unique skill set to come into that world with. And so I got good fast, and I had a lot of success quickly.
Well, even if you didn't have that foundation, I would have still expected the same answer, to be honest. And the reason I say that is just because based on your age at the time, you were in your early 30s, based on the life experience that comes with that, I imagine that you would be over it much faster than a younger guy would.
Yeah. Being out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, also when you're past 30, your body just can't keep up. Tyler and Nick and all those guys had a little more energy than I did. Mystery and Neil and I were all about the same age, and we sort of marveled at how, particularly Owen, Tyler, that is, could just do it all the time.
That's the thing. I mean, he's in his mid-30s, late 30s now?
No, he must be, he's about 10 years younger than me, so 33, 34, somewhere in there.
Okay. From what I know, I think he's in a very long-term relationship. He's got a couple of boys, but I don't think he's stopped, has he?
I don't think so. Doesn't surprise me. He's a machine.
Is he really?
Yeah. He's got a lot of energy. Very active mind. Very, very, very smart.
Yeah, we're going a little bit of a tangent here, but a curious personality, because he was depicted very, very harshly in the book, The Game, but ever since he's become a well-known public persona. And so I've heard a lot of his stuff, and I find that there's a lot of depth in what he says as well. And it's interesting. It's a very different perspective from the way he was originally presented and the way the world sees him now. And I wonder if maybe both are true, if he's really done that much work on himself and evolved that much as a human.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. I haven't seen him in a few years. And so I can only speak hypothetically.
Well, and that's what I'm doing as well.
Yeah. But, I think Project Hollywood and what you read about in The Game is largely true. And I think it was a big inflection point for each of us who were there. I think everybody kind of definitely had a powerful experience, and it impacted their life in one way or another. And perhaps for him, it showed him maybe his darker side or his capabilities in a negative way, and that maybe that proved to be a catalyst to turn in a very dynamic and positive way. It would completely make sense to me if that were the case, because it was such a potent experience for each of us.
And the man does come across as a bit of a self-improvement junkie based on what he puts out there, so it would fit.
Yeah. I think I remember hearing, a few years ago that he was just carrying around. It's funny, Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. If you haven't read that, it's a great book. It's sitting right here on my coffee table. My wife is reading it again right now. It's a great book. But apparently when it came out, he read it over and over and over again. I did hear that from somebody, which to me was a great sign because I thought that I think the content of that book is quite strong, and I could see him liking it, which made a lot of sense to me.
I want to jump back to something you had alluded to earlier, and I think this would be a good point to wrap up our conversation on. You mentioned that transitioning from your pickup days to, I guess, a more natural, more authentic way of being and interacting with women, you noticed that the type of women that were coming into your life changed. And so can you describe them? Like, who were the women that you were bringing into your life as a pickup artist? And who were the women that you started bringing into your life when you became Steven 2.0?
Right. I'll tell you, I'll explain that through a very clear example. When I came back from Los Angeles, I was still very much in the pickup mind, even though I wasn't out doing that actively like I was in LA. But I remember I was at Barnes & Noble at Union Square in New York City, and there was this beautiful blonde-haired woman in there hanging out with a friend of hers, and I saw her, and just out of my mouth came like this perfect little teasy kind of opener. She responded. We had this like 3 to 4 minute kind of very flirtatious conversation. I got her number. Hour later, I texted her, and I dated her on and off for the next 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year. And it was the kind of thing where she came from a lot of money, and so she would just call me out of the blue from Thailand or weird places. She'd be like, yeah, my brother and I got on a plane last night and flew out here.
Wow.
She was all over the place, both in her outer life and in her inner life. She was wild, but boy, was she sexy and attractive. And I was just completely transfixed with her. You know, I wanted her. I wanted to tame her and make her mine, and I didn't have the ability to do that because I was so disconnected from my own source of power. And I think our attraction to each other was very physical and outward because we were both kind of, you know, dancing around our inner lives, but not really related to that. So she's a great example of the kind of girl that I found myself with using pickup. She was very attractive, very beautiful, yes, wonderful person, nothing wrong with her. She was 10 years younger than me at the time. She was like 22 and I was 32. And she was just, you know, at that stage in her life and traveling and just wanting attention from everything and like very hot and all of that. Had a lot of money, and I was into that. So when I made the transition, let's fast forward a couple of years from that was like 05, let's say, to 07, I was in a relationship with a woman who was very sexy in her own right, very beautiful outwardly. But she was also involved in her life in a very different way. She was a little older. I think she was in her late 20s at the time. She was very active in like photography. She had kind of demonstrated through her lifestyle the ability to identify an interest, connect with that interest, and give that interest her own energy over a long period of time. In other words, she had a relationship to her interests. So one thing I would tell guys is if you're looking for a relationship, see if this woman that you're out on a date with has a relationship to anything that seems to have any durability and that is an expression of herself in an authentic way. And this woman did. And it was because I had developed a lifestyle at that point through conscious work, through actual study and in the application of certain skills I was interested in. I had built a lifestyle around me that was thriving. It fed me in a very organic way. It had populated my social life with people who had similar interests. So I had a social circle that was, you know, reflective of me, that was into the same things I was into. We were supportive of each other. And so she and I came together, and that relationship was much deeper. That relationship then ended a couple of years later. She ended up actually being like a model for the Suicide Girls. I don't know if you know about that. It's kind of pinup girl thing. She was into that, and you know, so that was like a whole experience I had with her. And then the woman I'm with now actually came right out of my very close circle of community, my very close social circle. We weren't friends per se, but we were certainly aware of each other before we got together. And this relationship has kind of just taken me beyond anything I've ever experienced in terms of both being absolutely aligned with another person, both in that horizontal way. We have the exact same interests. You know, we're going to make an offer on a house today out here in California, and we both knew immediately that it was the right place, and there's not been an ounce of disagreement. We're both totally connected to each other, but we also have the exact same kind of vertical axis. We're into the same kind of interests in terms of deepening our relationship to each other and to our lives and the world around us. So that kind of tracks through 3 different relationships my kind of state and the kinds of women I was attracting to me at that time.
Well, and it sounds like they're all great women, but the distinguishing factor to me, what I hear is that the women you started attracting later on were a lot more grounded, whereas the first girl was probably more like, I guess, a leaf in the wind.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Absolutely. Whereas more and more, as people mature, they tend to want to deepen their lives rather than just bounce off of things. I think that's a sign of maturity, and my own maturity reflected that. You attract where you're at. Naturally, you just attract where you're at. So if you want deeper relationships, more meaningful, inspired relationships, then guess what? You need to start with you, and that starts with you. You need to spark the flame within. You need to invest yourself in your life. What do you really want, and why aren't you going for that? All of these huge questions about living play out in our relationships. So as a dating coach, so much of what I do is more life coaching, though it's packaged in this framework of attraction, relationship, masculine, feminine, all these very important things that are part of a relationship that are incumbent or that are reflected in all of my choices with the world. One thing I'll say here, because I know you want to end, because I think this sums up all of this stuff maybe very well, is how a man lives is how a man loves. And so if I want a loving, powerful, inspired relationship, I have to first give that to my own life, to my own self. And really, that's the secret. But it's challenging to digest it simply because I can't see that. It's not like I can put 2 and 2 together and get 4. It's kind of like 2 plus 2 plus, some other mysterious thing that's going on in this world equals, that great relationship that I'm looking for. But I have to do my part, and that's my part.
Stephen, thank you. Those were powerful words to end things on. I really appreciate the depth of the conversation, and I certainly appreciate you revealing some pretty personal things about your life as well. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Alec.
If guys wanted to get a hold of you to learn more about what you do and what you've got out there, where can they go?
The website is lifestyle-arts.com, so lifestyle-arts.com. I have an ebook I sell, How to Get a Girlfriend, where I talk a lot about these things much more deeply and probably a little more clearly because I have good editors. So the book itself it's 7 chapters, and it talks about the 7 big skills I think men need to own to have a great relationship. And part of those skills are social skills. So in that book, I talk a lot about specific ways for meeting women, how to flirt, how to bait, how to tease, how to do all these things that are the kind of outward expressions of these inner things that we need to resolve. So there's that. I have an audio program too called Natural Attraction, where we take all those ideas even further. There's a blog on there. And of course, I have my own podcast, the Lifestyle Arts Podcast. So there's a few ways to get in touch with me. There's a contact form on that site. And there's also for guys interested in coaching or working with me one-on-one. I work mainly in Southern California, LA, San Diego now, although I do travel some and do phone coaching. But there's a form on that page that men can fill out as like a pseudo application I try my best to be sure in advance if a guy I'm going to be working with is really right for what I offer and is at the right place for what I offer. Because I think a lot of guys out there are really looking for they're looking for all kinds of things. I just want to be sure that the guys I work with are right for me, so we get the most out of that experience, and so that guy can move forward in the way that he wants. So anyway, all of that's at lifestyle-arts.com.
Perfect. And that link and all the other relevant links will be in the show notes. So guys, you can access them very easily just by visiting the website, mensdatingmastery.com. Stephen, thanks again. This has been a tremendous pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Alec. I hope I helped some people.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation, guys. If you like the content and you'd like to get more content like it, you can find it at mensdatingmastery.com. There are lots of other episodes on there, as well as lots of related articles. And if you'd like to get a hold of me directly, you can always do so by emailing me at alec@mensdatingmastery.com. That's Alec with a C. Always happy to hear from you guys. And I will talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Men's Dating Mastery, a podcast dedicated to improving the lives of men and the women around them.